Welcome to the afternoon, and we're going to be talking about urban nature and urban forests. The UK, as I'm sure many of you know, is one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. We're 189 out of 218, which is truly terrible. And I think partly due to our heritage, in that due to the Industrial Revolution and the Agricultural Revolution, we learned how to wipe out nature really efficiently first. And we've recorded how we've wiped out nature ever since. So now I think is our time to try and get nature back into a decent condition. And certainly, it's terrifying when you hear statistics such as, 11 of the 47 UK mammals that exist are now classed as at imminent risk of extinction. I can't actually remember the last time I saw a hedgehog, which is truly sad. And I sit up here in the Chiltern, which is the backdrop behind me. So David Attenborough, our hero, pretty much sums this up as we're never really going to look after nature unless people understand its importance and value it. And part of the crucial part of that is that we need to do that where people live, which makes nature in cities and connecting people with nature in cities really fundamental to what we do. Yes, people will go out into the countryside and enjoy it, but what we need to do is to take the countryside, take nature, take wildlife to people, and as Robin Smell said yesterday, help people experience nature in their daily journeys or their daily commutes. Yesterday we heard some fantastic examples. Melbourne and Paris really stood out for me about places that are doing brilliant work in engaging people with nature through corridors and walkways and alleyways, etc. But there is a huge amount more that we need to do. And I also just wanted to say, and again, this is very close to my heart, Heritage Fund has spent years investing in restoring historic parks, but what we're asking you to think about through this conference is to think about networks, to think about ecosystem systems. So think about it as the body. Previously we've kind of focused on maybe the hearts, the flagship parks, the principal parks, but it's about all nature, corridors, linking spaces. That's what we're talking about at this conference. It's about how do we create these nature networks that extend right across cities. And I know there were some questions earlier today about how we balance biodiversity and health and well-being. I went to some local parks and saw how nature was kind of trampled due to the sheer numbers of people using spaces. But I think that's also part about helping people understand the value of nature and treading lightly. And hopefully we're going to cover some of that this afternoon. My first task is to introduce the brilliant Beth Collier, who is the director and founder of the Wild in the City project, and is really an expert on developing those sort of close personal relationships with nature. So over to you, Beth, and thank you very much.
Lovely, thank you. Thanks, Drew. Thanks very much for inviting me to speak. Thank you to Future Parks for the opportunity. I've been invited to help contextualise your afternoon session, thinking about urban nature and forests, by asking the question, why do we need nature in cities? And I'm going to try and address that question by talking about some of the communities that I work with through Wild in the City. Wild in the City is a community organisation based in London, but working throughout the country. And we are building a community of people that gather in nature to learn, to have fun, and to feel good. If we go on to the next slide. We go on to the next slide, that's it, and the next one again. And we do this, we build community through supporting people to develop a closer relationship with nature by learning traditional crafts and ways of being in nature that would have been familiar to our ancestors. So whether that's understanding wildlife through its behaviour, for example, through things like tracking, traditional arts like natural navigation, but also skills for living comfortably in wooded spaces, such as plants for wild food and medicine, learning how to forage. If you flick through the next 5 slides, we'll see some examples of our groups doing that. The people we work with are all urban residents, people of colour who live in areas typically with a deficiency of access to nature, or have historically become disenfranchised with the natural world through other experiences that have made them feel they don't belong in nature. Now, all of the pictures you've just seen are in Croydon in London. If we just pause here on this slide. So what I want to show is how important forests and woodland within cities are. They really are not just our classroom, but also they're our sanctuary, that the people we work with really are drawn to these spaces for emotional sustenance, as well as to take their place as part of nature and wildlife. And that very much is our message, that we are part of nature and the natural world. And if we are disconnected, either through not having habitat around us, or because there has been a cultural distancing, then we're going to feel the impact of that loss, whether or not we're aware of it. And then there's a loss and a trauma that sits with us psychologically. And a lot of what we're doing is tending to the harm, to the pain of being separated from nature, by helping people to feel comfortable in the natural world again. And when I say being comfortable, that's everything from physical comfort of knowing sort of how to dress, to the emotional comfort of feeling, I know how to interact, I feel comfortable in this space, I know I belong here. So that there can be a real journey for some people in reclaiming their place in nature. One of our programs that we use to do this is called Nature Connectors. And through this program, it's a 6-week program, we're introducing people to the wildlife on their doorstep. So again, this comes back to being centered in one of the world's largest capitals in London, but we have so many fantastic woodlands, wetlands, chalk grasslands, heathlands that many people aren't aware of. But a lot of the people that come along to these experiences either aren't aware that they have this on their doorstep, or they are living in areas with a deficiency of access, and so they have slightly longer journeys to find and experience these wonderful settings that we do have. So throughout the 6 weeks, we visit different local habitats, learning about the wildlife that lives there and the interdependence of the ecosystem. And we also think about traditional ancestral skills for living comfortably in that setting. So it might learn about how to light a fire using the material around us and cook ourselves a meal, how to erect a shelter to keep us warm and dry outside so we can continue our course whether or not it's raining. And through doing this, stepping into the natural world with the intention of becoming part of it, spending longer periods of time immersed in nature so that we have to attend to our needs, our hunger, our thirst, our hygiene, we start to tune in to nature more akin to how our ancestors would have done, which is wanting to live in harmony and valuing nature's use in terms of our emotional health, but also practically that there's meaning in understanding an ash tree, an oak tree, being able to identify cow parsley. Now, obviously, you don't need to know the name of things to be able to enjoy nature and the natural world, but it does open up a whole new layer of interaction, that if we do have a familiarity with what's around us, what it needs, how it behaves, and how we can make use of it to sustain ourselves. So in addition to visiting different habitats and learning practical traditional skills, we also have lots of time around the fire to reflect on what is our relationship with nature and the natural world, and the reasons why nature may or may not have been part of our family lives growing up, or part of our formative experience. So it's a very therapeutic program, therapeutic in terms of there's often a befriending process in stepping into nature and feeling a deeper connection, but also in processing what for a lot of people are losses, in realizing there has been a disconnect. Or it might be simply enjoying the company of other people of colour for those that already have a deep connection with nature. Often when we're stepping into nature-based activity, people of colour find that they're the only one. So they find real value in being part of a community. If we go to the next slide. Here's an example. We're foraging gorse on, I think this is Mitcham Common, and we turn this into a really nice syrup for a cordial. If we go to the next slide. And this is someone practicing their fire lighting skills, just using birch bark. Again, there's a real emphasis on using what's around us and in doing that, people develop a real affinity and respect for the birch tree. It becomes something of an emblem of the course, because we realise how valuable it is and how valuable it would have been to our ancestors who would have used this to light the fire. And then it gives birth to a deep respect for silver birch as a tree, but also for other trees. We feel real meaning and purpose in them being grown and living close by us. And that's something really special that comes from the course, that nature is treasured, that there's a desire, greater desire to protect. And we find that people come along more interested then in going into other conservation programs, learning about how to protect and look after wildlife around them, and really keen to see more different species around them, really understanding from that embodied sense of why we need plants and biodiversity around us. If we go to the next slide. Okay, here we are around the fire. This is our classroom base camp in the woods. Again, this is in Croydon. This is just near New Addington, getting a cup of tea going. If we go to the next slide. And here we're enjoying the open country views, just on the edge of the North Downs. Very special to have these woodlands and chalk valleys right on our doorstep here in South London. We go to the next slide. So after Nature Connectors, people have the opportunity to take that learning and that passion further. And we've developed a nature guide program, which selects people from the Nature Connectors course. And we train, again, people of colour who are volunteers in how to lead others in nature. And the real benefit of this is expanding leadership amongst people of colour. Typically, obviously, the environmental field is more white and middle class, and what we really want to do is to increase diversity, so lots of people know and understand that these spaces and places are for us, and as a consequence we have more people feeling they can take ownership of protecting and looking after natural settings and spaces. So this is a course that sees them gain experience as hike leaders, teaching woodland living skills and natural history, and also holding ecotherapy groups, which again supports other people in feeling part of nature and understanding the natural world. So it's a really nice follow-on program from Nature Connectors, helping people nurture and develop a passion and then take that into leadership. We go to the next slide. These are our current cohort of nature guides. We've got Suzanne, Deborah and Nicole, and they will be, or currently are, leading people not just countryside within the city, our urban countryside, but also beyond, further afield, particularly in the southeast region. And what they do is help give people the confidence to make their own independent visits, exploring nature in London, but also beyond. So we're really proud of these programmes and how they foster a sense of engagement amongst communities that typically are less present in nature and within the environmental sector. And for us, another importance of making sure all communities feel part of the movement to make cities greener and to protect our climate and natural world is that, in particular, those on low incomes and ethnic minorities tend to live in areas in the city with a deficiency of access to nature, but also in areas with higher levels of pollution, areas that are more impacted by heat sinks, urban island heat impact. So it's really important that communities that live in this area are aware of these issues, but also feel empowered to act, to counter them. Obviously, trees are a huge part of protecting us and nurturing us, as I've tried to illustrate the importance there emotionally, but also socially and physiologically for the communities we work with, being around trees, and then empowering people to know they can do something. In areas with a deficiency of access to nature, There tends to also be issues with more antisocial behaviour, and there are direct links with the amount of trees, how green a space how green a space looks, in terms of providing, you could call it calming and cooling areas. There's a poverty in not being having nature around. That there's a poverty in not having nature close by us, which creates a disadvantage for particular groups. So there's a real public health and social justice aspect in making sure that not only do all areas have sufficient green around us to support our optimal health, but that all communities are empowered to feel involved in making our habitat, our city, livable. If we go on to the next slide. And the next one, there's Mike, one of our nature guides. So here's an example of us in the city. Typically a landscape that's more busy, that's grey, that's hectic, that's frantic. And this can have a real impact on our physiological systems. And in fact, it can be interpreted by our body as a potential threat. And we can react physiologically as if we're at risk, evoking our fight or flight response, which raises cortisol, our stress hormone, raises our heartbeat, and over long periods of time pushes us into a heightened state when we're running off adrenaline for longer periods, where we can be more angry, more frustrated, experiencing more negative emotions. Indeed, these spaces triggers areas of the brain associated with fear and stress, the amygdala. We're going into the next slide. We'll see that when we're in a natural setting, it's an optimum habitat for us physiologically, that we tend to have lower stress rates. The stress hormone cortisol is lower, our heart rate is lower, we feel less stressed, less anxious. The trees around us will be supporting both our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, giving us better digestion, better sleep. That it's a no-brainer that being in a natural habitat is what we were born for. And it raises the question then, why are we tolerating city habitats which are causing harm to us? There are stresses that we allow to exist in the city, from the greyness of how they look to the pollutants that come from our lifestyles, that are causing us real harm. And it's really a very dysfunctional relationship to sort of quietly allow ourselves to be undermined by these city stresses, when we know being around nature enhances our sense of well-being. So I'm coming to a close. If we can go to the next slide. And again, the next slide, please. And the next one is for us to think about, what do we need as human beings for optimal health? We know what we need around us in terms of noise, how much better birdsong is for us than the sounds of loud motor vehicles. That the impact of seeing green and green foliage over grey concrete, what that does to our brain and how we respond to that physiologically. What can we do to surround ourselves with what we need? We know that if the stickleback in a river doesn't have certain conditions and is poisoned by pesticides running off fields, that it's not going to thrive, that it's going to be impacted. We're going to start to affect its reproduction and other internal systems. We need to understand the same thing is happening to us, that as an animal, as humans, we also have conditions that we need from our habitat. What can we do to ensure that our surroundings and cities appropriately nurture us in terms of what we need, rather than allowing ourselves to fester and struggle in a climate and atmosphere which is causing us harm, and sitting there not doing anything about it? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Beth. That was absolutely brilliant, really inspiring work. And I was looking at the chat there, and I saw someone saying we need more Beths, and we absolutely do. We need more projects like the project that you're running. And I've just seen the best classroom ever. I never thought I'd seen Croydon, but the most beautiful woodland classroom. So thank you so much. I just thank you to the team that you work with as well, because it was really inspiring. I love the talk about ancestral connections, and if only everybody understood the value of a birch tree, the way that you're teaching children, that would be so worthwhile. So, everybody really should be entitled to have access to an education like that. And I hope with things like the new natural history O-level starting up soon, or GCSE, that hopefully more people will be able to experience and understand nature the way that you've been able to teach people. So thank you very much, Beth, indeed.
My pleasure. Sorry for the technical hitch. Thanks for inviting me.
Can I just say, the smoothest ever link to change of format ever. So my heart went for a moment, but incredibly smoothly done. So thank you so much. That's brilliant.
Thank you. Okay.